Okay, thank you very much, Bahar, and welcome. Actually, we're 40 plus people, so I'm very happy to have you all. As Bahar said, this is part of a series of BBLs, workshops, conversations we're having, um, with the expectation that we're unlikely to be traveling, definitely for the rest of the calendar year, but possibly for the rest of the fiscal year. And the sense that we're not going to be able to put things on hold. We wanted to start collecting good practices, exchanging views on what works, what doesn't work so well, and doing remote evaluations. I hesitate to say remote missions because that would suggest sort of that we're still doing things the way that we typically did them. In many ways, we have to step back, decide what's going to work, what's not. So this is really how we do remote data collection, how we do remote evaluation more than anything else. It may mean there are some things that we can't do, but rather than have everyone sort of reinventing the wheel, we thought that we would start off by getting everyone together. We've got a panel that's composed of the TTLs for the evaluations that have probably got the most time under their belt working in this new environment, and that's nutrition and the CHAD CPE. And what we've done is we've circulated sort of four basic questions. I'm going to divide this discussion into four, so I'll time them so that we don't let one part sort of dominate. We may end up sort of moving before we've completed the discussion, but we can return to it. The panelists will speak briefly about their experience in their respective evaluations, and then we'll open it up for discussion, because everyone's got a little bit of the puzzle here. We don't expect to have, a best practice note anytime soon, but we want to start accumulating that evidence. The other two sessions we have planned, one will be with evaluation offices from other international institutions who've now been facing this. Interestingly enough, the Asian Development Bank just finished their Bangladesh CPE, which they did remotely. So we've had some interesting discussions with them. Then we'll have another session on engaging with the private sector in doing remote data collection or evaluation. Before I start, let me thank everyone who was involved in setting this up. From Casey, Bahar, Peter, Hema, our panelists, Jenny, Mercedes, Felix, Alejandro. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you just keep yourselves on mute. So that's everyone. That's the game plan. We're just going to be taking this whole process sort of one step at a time and learning as we go along in terms of what works. And so with that, let me turn to the first topic, which is preparing the mission. And this is the organization, the setting up interviews, and there's really sort of three sub-questions under this. The first is how to identify and reach the right stakeholders. Second issue is the logistical and ethical considerations of using local consultants, and then the role of the country office. And with that, let me start off maybe 3 or 4 minutes, Felix, and then Jenny, and then we'll open it up. And this whole segment will be about 15 minutes. So over to you, Felix.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm happy to share the experience that we had in Chad, and we are still in the process learning more. And so this is an experience that we could share. First, in Chad, we worked under the context where the bank office was partly closed, and some of the government officials were working half day, sometimes some of the days in the week. And so we had a case where we didn't have a full day, we couldn't have a full day meetings, also because of the time difference between Chad and US. And so that's the context in which we work. How did we identify the stakeholders? First, what we did is to contact the CPF. Now, there are two broad ways by which we contacted the right stakeholders in our thinking. First is the body of evidence that is available. And so you do have the CPF. It acknowledges the people that contributed to it. When you look at it, you see that most of the people there are bank staff. And so that gives you one set of people, the TTL and everybody who has contributed to the CPF. And then we looked at the program document. The program documents also will give you some list of people who have contributed to each of the programs. And our understanding is that from the CPF is the strategy, but the implementing tool or instrument is the program document. And so there you get a list of people that have been that the team worked with. And so government officials, development partners, CSOs, academia, you can find some of them there. Where there is an ICR, you can also get some information from there of people that they've contacted. Sometimes some of the ICRs provide a list of people contacted during the preparation. And so that allows you to know who has been involved. So that's one body of evidence that one could have. The second one is what I call a simple contact tracing approach, where whichever person, whoever you meet, you speak to, if it's the TTL or government officials, you also request who they have been working with. And so that gives us the second and sometimes the third layer of people that we need to talk to. For example, you could get the names and contact of chairpersons or chairs of development partner groups. You could get who are the influential people in that group. You could get the champions in the sector. And so those are people that you want to talk to. They can provide you with data. And you don't need to interview everyone, but at least it gives you the baseline of data of people that you need to speak to. And so after my 3 minutes, I could continue a little bit if Jeff, I do have time, of what we did with when we had the list. So we put together all of this as one list, and then we shared it with the country team. But if there's time, I can continue, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Jenny.
Yes. So adding from nutrition. So our exercise was just a little bit different to put it into context because we had 8 countries, and in each country we were looking at a portfolio of projects over 10 years. So we had it. So in total there was about 30 interviews in each country, so about 240 interviews and about 150 projects, because each country has like 15 to 20 projects, right? And you're looking at a piece of each project. And then, so the organization of the teams remotely was really important in terms of ensuring that everyone follows the same protocol. And so we had like a cascade of people across the different countries. And then we had teams matching up national and international consultants, as well as IEG staff, with the same protocol of what they were collecting. In terms of the data collection, so we did have to do in all of the countries, we still had to do like an emission letter, or even though we didn't put the time frame, it was just for the data collection, but they still needed that formal contact for contacting the government partners. But what was important there in the time frame was how to be strategic in terms of collecting information, what you really want to collect. And we had our protocol, and we didn't necessarily design it with COVID in mind. But I think if we were going to do it again, maybe we would be more strategic, because it's not the same as a mission. Your time frame, so in a mission you have X number of weeks to meet with key persons. In this environment, you actually have an opportunity to meet with a variety of people over an extended period of time. And it's actually what we've discovered quite challenging to say we're only going to meet you within 2-week period, because people's availability was challenging. In terms of the time differences, though, we worked at the timeline of the country. So consultants worked from the morning in the country, and then we worked in the evenings and late hours to try to get people up at those times. And that can be challenging as well, because the team members, the quality of information can be challenging you're getting from team members, but it also requires a dependency on the person in the country as well, right? And remember, this person in the country is also confined. In all of our countries, the offices were closed, so they were confined to their home. Even if they were in the same community as the people they're interviewing, they could not go. We asked them ethically not to go out and have these interviews. There were some cases where there was local protocol where they could meet certain officials, but other than that, we asked them to do everything from home. So using the technology. So in terms of engaging and identifying actors, I'll just say something quickly about that. So we used a bit of the same approach that was mentioned by Felix in terms of the contact tracing and the list. So we had the list from the projects, but what was important to us also was thinking about the different levels of actors. And the truth is the bank staff cannot provide all the community actors. So what we did is we did a multi-level contact tracing. So, and also my experience is that the persons recommended in the documents are not always the most pertinent persons with the knowledge on the projects. So what was important here was, though, also to identify national consultants that had networks to do the contract tracing. If you had a consultant that didn't have that network, it was challenging to identify those contacts. And so that they could interact easily with the bank staff at the national level, but then the national level persons could identify persons at the subnational, and we went all the way down to community level. Okay, I think I'm out of time, so I'll move to next.
Yeah, I'm just going to open this topic up for if people want comments, they can either type their name in, indicate that they like to speak. But let me ask you both a question. What, from in this aspect of doing the evaluation, what was the biggest difference? I mean, the thing that you didn't and the thing that you didn't anticipate from the normal way of doing things, apart from the doing it over a different time frame. As Jenny said, if knowing what you know now, what might you have done differently? Let me put it that way. Felix, Jenny, either of you?
I think we could have used the time frame to our advantage more. That's the main thing. I mean, we really could have just been more strategic, and because it's a huge opportunity, actually, in terms of actually better contacting better the right people.
Felix, any thoughts? What might you have done differently?
Yeah, Jeff, as I mentioned earlier, we had prepared the list. We shared with the government, with the country team, and we realized that many of the people in the list were not there. And so even though we had prepared, they had been moved from government. And so you had to meet a completely different group of people as compared to what you see in the program document. And so we were going on mission and probably would have just met just some set of new people, and they would have just given us what they have. But now with COVID, and we had time to now see, okay, if these people are not there, are there other people, technical people, who were there at the time when this project was implemented? And that gave us an opportunity to have a broader group of people. So it's not just the coordinators, but it's also the technical people who are in the ministries and the agencies. They also joined some of the meetings. And so that is the big difference, that we would have gone to mission and just met one person, and that would have been it.
Okay, so the questions are coming in. So let me, I'm just going to try to paraphrase some of them. Is there a technology bias in conducting evaluations, given that we're really constrained, or without taking specific actions, we'll be constrained to those who have access to the technologies that we meet?
There is, Jeff. There is. For some of the people, this is the very first time they are doing anything virtual. And so in our case, some of them said, we can't do WebEx. So we had to do Zoom. And so they have their own preferences. And they had mentioned to us that some of the TTLs in operations were already meeting them using Zoom. And so we had to adapt. And so we said, okay, fine, let's switch to Zoom. And so you need to adapt to what will make them comfortable to give you the data. And we did that in our case.
Okay. Jenny, Mercedes, anything on
that? We
yes,
have
maybe just Jeff, some of these points we're gonna talk about in the next
Yeah, yeah. So the next thing we'll go on to in 4 minutes is actually the conducting of the interviews. But this is just in terms of identifying who you're going to talk to.
Yeah, basically identification doesn't differ much from what you do in regular missions. It's a lot of desk work that you previously do before your mission. Many times the CMU help in identifying these relevant counterparts. And as Jenny said, it was essential to have local consultants with a good networks and people that knows people and how to reach them. In terms of technology, we didn't have, and I'm gonna say that in the following topic, we didn't have many major limitations. Everybody was working remotely, and even at the community level, we were able to communicate with direct beneficiaries, even through WhatsApp calls.
One of the things that was helpful in the nutrition evaluation, because we were dealing with so many different projects, it was very helpful to share the list of interviewees, of contact persons with a collective of TTLs in the CMU, essentially, because they could give us really good advice then on who's missing, their email has changed, etc. It socialized the evaluation, actually. You're muted.
Jeff, I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you. So, yes, I was saying, given that most of the country offices are either closed, operating partially, and we often rely on the country office to help set up meetings, identify the right counterparts. To what extent were you able to rely on country offices, and how did you adapt to any constraints?
For us, we really relied on the team members more so. I mean, because we contacted the persons working in that CMU, essentially the TTLs. It wasn't only in one country did they actually go through and list who needs to be contacted. That was Nicaragua, and that's their procedure. In terms of the letters, though, we relied on the CMU just like usual. I mean, everybody is still doing their job just from home, just like us. So essentially, they were super helpful in the letters and the communication of that to the ministries of finance and the other ministries, and ensuring that development partners were copied, this type of thing. Yes.
Okay.
Jeff, if I may add, we worked with a program assistant in the CMU and the country economist, and we'll come to the role of the country economy of the CMU, but they did a lot of work at the background. First with our list to cleaning it up, second with our one pager that we sent to them, and so they helped to translate, they helped the review, and they made sure that the letters went to the right people. And so they were very reliable, and in some cases they had to take their modem to the offices of some of the government officials to give them internet connections, and we will come to that.
Okay, great, thank you. Some of the questions are actually bleeding into our next topic, so let me just switch to that right now. So, conducting interviews remotely, we've identified 4 issues. First are technological hurdles, requirements. I think Stephen Hutton asked the question of, well, a lot of community organizations don't even have internet access. So how do we address that? There's the issue of language barriers. Using translation, how well does that work? What did you learn from using translation? What works, what doesn't work? There are some questions about whether or not it's okay to record meetings. Clearly one wants consent, but does advanced consent, but does that itself become problematic? And what about confidentiality? We actually don't, I believe, have a protocol for storing recordings of confidential meetings. Is this something that has come up? So let me start with Felix or Mercedes.
I can do it.
Okay, Mercedes, please.
Okay, thank you. Just to give some space to Felix. So in our case, just as our daily life from home-based work, we have used all possible video conferencing tools for the interviews. This is WebEx, Zoom. The other one was Microsoft Teams, even WhatsApp and Skype. Each of our consultants on the ground chose their preferred tool that they were more familiar with, and this is particularly important to enable them to manage the features effectively. For instance, to use the built-in recording features of these platforms is very important. We did not request as a team to the country teams to record the meetings, because basically the teams were conformed by 2 or 3 people. So there were, 2 or 3 IAG people from IAG in their interview who would be able to take notes. But in some cases, and this was the case of Indonesia, the consultants felt more comfortable in having the interview recorded. Of course, in all cases, we're asked consent before, as we would do even in face-to-face meetings. And we, in all cases, they accepted, and meetings were recorded. Again, I would say that my perception regarding recording is that depending on the savviness of the respondent, how do they know how these platforms work, if they don't consent and they don't realize, or they are unable to see whether you're recording or not, because now I think that we can see here this meeting is recording, but it may not be that visible. So it may affect the candor of responses if they fear that you are, or even using an external voice record that is difficult to identify, from an online. So in that sense, I think there is a risk of having less candor responses because of the fear of recording if you don't feel comfortable with. I would say that overall, we didn't experience major concern about connectivity issues, and most of the time we were able to conduct the interview with the video on. That enables us to better engage and even observe body language, at least this part up, right? And of course, there were some cases in which we had grouped interviews with 4 or 5 respondents at the same time. And yes, we have to switch it on and off just to save some bandwidth, but it was not the majority of cases. And even, we had cases in which the respondent, bank staff has actually preferred not to start their video because of an, allergy or eye concern, whatever, and they preferred, and of course we accept that. So using audio only without the video, of course, can affect the quality of the evidence we are collecting. And just to give you an example, my team in Indonesia had an interview with a local, with a direct beneficiary of a project. It was a mother of our population of interest, which is the 1,000 Days group. And the interview was through WhatsApp call. And our consultant had the perception that that mother was kind of guided in her responses by the facilitator of the program who actually helped us to reach her. So that wouldn't have happened in face-to-face meetings, because first you can ask the facilitator to exclude himself for a while you conduct the interview, or even if he is present, we can observe whether he is like telling her what to say and so forth. So that was an experience that we had. It was a one case in which it was, of course, we cannot validate whether that happened or not, but of course we took into account the evidence collected through that interview and weighted it a little bit different with respect to the other responses.
Yeah. Just before passing it on to Felix, let me ask you a question. What can you do to create the enabling environment for people to feel comfortable. So for government officials, do they need to see, say, for example, a letter from a government department that gives them freedom to have this discussion?
They're supposed to
donors,
receive that letter in advance, because
okay.
This is part of our mission announcement letter that we, IAG, signed, and the CMU distributes across all the ministries that are in copy. So they are, by the time they accept the interview, they are supposed to be notified that we are going to contact them. There were some cases in which, for some ministries, this letter takes longer to arrive. So we were like struggling whether, when did it arrive and so forth. But overall, it is through a formal letter, yes.
Did you also send ahead to whoever you were going to talk to the questions that you were going to ask? Well, one of the things that we often find is they may not get the right people into the meeting, which becomes more complicated when it's remote. Did you send questions ahead of time for each meeting? And I'll let me turn to Felix in terms of how this was handled. How do you make sure that you, first of all, get a focused meeting on the specific questions, and that there are the right people in the room, particularly when it's a government department you're meeting with? Felix, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. There are many points, but first let me state two things. That for each, just to add to what Mercedes says, for each meeting that we had, in our case, we first did two things. One, we sent them that general questions that we have in our approach paper, and so that went to them with what I call the one pager, an introduction to the evaluation. We also mentioned to them that this is not an evaluation of the government, and that made them very comfortable. We said we are evaluating with the World Bank. We want to know whether the World Bank did the work, how effective they were, and how the strategy. So these are issues not related to the government, and so that made them really comfortable. In our case, and each person that we met, we sent them what we call the specific questions related to the sector. And that allowed them to bring in all the people that are needed to respond to the questions. And so that made it easier. They were very comfortable with the recording. We actually told them that there is a language barrier. There are some members of the team who do not speak French, and we have an interpreter with us. But we want to make sure that we report the right information that they give us. And we also want to use that data that we collect for qualitative analysis. And so it's not going to be put out once it's with us, it's not going to be shared. And so for each of them, we made sure that we told them that. We asked them, do we need to bring a letter before? They said no. And so Ministry of Finance, coordinators of projects, they were comfortable. And so we went ahead with this. We didn't face any challenge for all the meetings that we had with them. Even including the meetings with the CMU, they didn't have a problem with me recording it. So that's one point that I would like to make in here. I also would like to emphasize that there are some biases that we need to know when it comes to using local consultants. Challenges are that they have political affiliations, and they have views about certain people that you may be interviewing. And so you need to be careful that those biases doesn't influence the data that you are collecting, because they try to push that in. And so I'm happy that you have a typical example, Mercedes, of something that happened in your case where they tried to push their biases to yours. But we didn't we hired a consultant from Burkina Faso to work in Chad because we didn't get somebody who was bilingual in Chad. And so we didn't face that challenge that you did.
Okay, so two of the questions that are coming up. So Rasmus was asking about if they had a sense of any different level of candor relative to what you're used to, and Gisela has a comment. Did you feel a higher risk of bias by relying that much on country office TTLs, project officials for local interviews? Is this?
Can I add something?
Yes, please. Yes.
So on the candor, I mean, I think in some of the interviews, I actually felt like there was more candor because they were at their house and they were by themselves and there was things going on. They just wanted to tell us what needed to be told and very clearly. So one of the interviews with the director in Rwanda of the nutrition program, for example, I do not think she would have spoken like that in person. Um, but in some of the countries, I think that recording would be unacceptable. In Nicaragua, I think it would have been caused really a lot of discomfort. In Rwanda, I think it would have meant that we could not interview half the people we interviewed because there was already a lot of concern about interviewing people who were formerly in the government and not in the government now. But getting the right people, I actually think in some ways, for Rwanda, for example, I think we actually got more of the right people because we did this tracing, but it also meant some inefficiencies maybe in terms of having more interviews. Yes.
On the question of whether or not to record or not to record, is this something that you consulted the country office on to see whether or not it was acceptable practice, or did you just play it by ear on a meeting by meeting basis?
Well, no, this depends actually on each of the country teams. I mean, we, the nutrition evaluation team, we didn't request our consultants to record. Some of them, they have the practice as independent evaluators, they have that practice. And the only thing I said is, please ask consent before doing that. And she got it every time, even in written in the chat box, right? Yep. I will maybe like to follow up on Rasmus' question. I don't think we are dealing with a bigger risk of candor or not because it's virtual or not. We have faced in our normal missions, I mean, interviews that are extraordinary, other interviews that are not that explanatory and so forth. So I think here the same, we have the same heterogeneity as in face-to-face. But I found something interesting that the COVID situation and being everybody working from home is actually a connecting point at the beginning of the interview. So we are all talking how things are in your country, for how long have you been working like this, in which is your environment. Some of them have so it works as an icebreaker at the beginning because we are all in the same situation, and that joined us. So I think that is a plus from being in an atypical situation that we maybe wouldn't be able to interact like that in face-to-face. I tend to because it's in my nature, but maybe this is an opportunity to start engaging differently.
Now, in terms of your local consultants, were they operating remotely from within the country, or did they actually physically meet with people? And if the latter, how did you ensure their own safety in a COVID environment? Felix or Jenny? Yeah.
I was not willing to let them work in meetings. I felt that it was too much of a risk, and I thought it was too much of a responsibility. We need to, as it is, many of them had family concerns, and there was this is something to be aware of, that when you have this size of a team of consultants, there were quite a number of health family concerns during a time of COVID that we had to deal with and be very tolerant and understanding of.
Jeff, in our case, they also worked remotely. I mean, the good thing is that they knew the country, they knew some of the people in the country, and so they could tell you that you could meet this person, there's this person here who probably would have contributed to the project. Why don't you talk to? So we had suggestions from them, so it was good. In terms of candor, I think that for most of the meetings, we asked all our questions, and they asked, do you have any more questions for us? And they were happy to speak, and we found that authentic. We didn't feel that they were trying to hide. There were cases where they said, look, this one is beyond me. Can you speak to this person in the Ministry of Finance? That person has more information. or can you speak to this question belongs to this other ministry? Can you speak to them? And then they gave us names of people to contact. And that I didn't think posed a lot of risk to us per se. We needed to direct some of the questions to other people who had more knowledge on the topic. And so that was good. We had also another case where DFID, when we interviewed them, they asked for the recording, that they think that is a good interview. They want to give it to the next person who was coming after the person who the next commissioner to chat. So they asked for it, and we said, okay, it's fine, we can share it with you, because it's just interview between us and them, and it doesn't include any other person. So that is also one case that we feel, just one case.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. So I just go into the third topic, field work, and by this we really mean either project level work or having to leave the capital city, where connectivity issues become more complicated, where you're dealing with communities. So how do you manage data collection and direct observation of project outcomes, outputs beyond what's written in reports? So let's, I guess we should start with Mercedes and Jenny.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think field work and direct observation is the missing piece in remote missions, or remote evaluations, as you want to call it. We haven't been able to do so, and it's so extremely important to directly observe what the project has done and how those things that we evaluators tend to minimize, because we want outcome indicators, not outputs. But looking directly at the outputs and being able to see the renovations of the health facilities and compare the one that is not renovated, the one that is renovated, how people would feel if they enter to those health facilities that are cleaner, newer, the possibility even to engage spontaneously with beneficiaries, with patients, with frontline doctors that are there. And so you have unscheduled interviews that enrich your context and understanding. We did that in Armenia at PPR, in Nepal when we were with Jenny, spending 5 days in remote areas, looking at every latrine that the project has contracted and even using them at some point, yes. Watching firsthand how people change their behavior. The washing hand stations. You don't understand what a hand washing station looks like when you read. You understand when you see it. You understand when you see a water filter, how people do to have a cleaner water and how that changed their life and their health of their family. So I think that is a big gap, because even our local consultants were not able to travel to those areas. So even another solution could be to engage even more local consultants at that community level. But the likelihood of really finding someone with the capacities and the skills that we are looking for to be able to conduct that work, it's not as in the capital. So I think that lack of human capital at the very remote areas that we would like to go, there's no replacement for that.
That actually when we open it up to broader discussion, if people have suggestions or experience to share on that, that would be most helpful. Jenny, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I think another way of identifying the consultants would have been to work with a firm or something, or an NGO or something like that. But we worked with the country office, the evaluation network, CLEAR, and we asked. We also looked for people with analytical experience that weren't necessarily in our core sectors, but they were with the bank, because we were concerned about working remotely with somebody who didn't have any knowledge of the bank's program as well. So one of the things that I found effective in Rwanda, and several of the countries we had something similar, was that in Rwanda we found someone from agriculture sector and from social protection health. But it was actually interesting in the interview to have them switch roles, because I found that having them together actually helped neutralize some of their views and their experiences, because they both came from a very different perspective of their technical knowledge, let's put it that way, on the issues, and it really helped, I think, balance what was coming out of the interviews, because they did the interviews together actually.
Now, in the same physical spot?
No, they just both joined remotely.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I don't know if they've ever actually met each other.
Okay. So Felix, I know that before you went to Chad, you organized a training for some staff on doing focus groups.
Yes.
Were you able to use any of that in conducting the remote evaluation? Any thought to how one does a focus group in that situation?
Yeah, so we planned to do that, but we decided not later on that it was not feasible to do that, because getting them together for a focus group, you need to be sure that doing it virtually is something that we thought that it's going to be really very difficult to put all of them together at a particular time. And because the focus group also requires that you have people with similar experience or in a similar sector who have the same kind of knowledge base, and that requirement could not be met because it was really very difficult to get them separately to agree to a particular time. So we decided to shelve that. But what we did is that earlier on we had contacted the geospatial, the GEMS group in the bank, and so they had shared with us some of the projects in Chad where that were within our portfolio, and so we are using that data. We've seen the pictures there, and we are examining them, but you need a lot of secondary data to be able to make sense of what you see from that geospatial data that they have online. They had already collected some data that we are analyzing now. But of course, like Mercedes said, that doesn't replace going to the field and really observing yourself. In this case, they have data that people have observed and put there for a different purpose. And so we can only use that for now. And so that's the downside of one of the disadvantages of not going on mission to physically observe yourself as an evaluator.
So how will you, if it turns out to be the case that it's impossible to consult communities on the ground and to do this kind of field work, how will you reflect that in your findings?
Yeah, I think that if it had been another type of crisis, not for COVID, where we could send a local consultant to the field, we could have still been able to do this focus group. We could have still been able to bring the women together to interview them with one person there. Now, we understand that we are working in a fragile state, and even in the hinterland, internet connection, even in the city, is difficult. And so having internet connection in the hinterland is even more difficult. And so you cannot have that. Now, the advantage of the geospatial group, the GEMS group, is that they collect the data offline. And so as soon as they come to their offices, they're able to upload for us. And so that gives us some confidence that this is some data that you can rely on. And you cannot do that for DPOs. You can only do that for projects, investment projects. And so that's the difference. And then in our case, we didn't intend to use them for DPOs anyway. And so we could use that evidence that is available.
So I'm reading the chat. So Victoria and Kostya are both asking about local consultants and site visits. And actually, I'm wondering, Victoria, maybe if you want to, I believe your comment is sharing an example of how this has been done. Would you like to intervene and tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, hi Jeff, hi everyone. Yeah, I can give a little bit of a background for my question, because I actually, when I was on DICE, I was the one who was preparing a guidance note for virtual supervision. And Yeah, we dealt with a lot of issues, but mostly operational team for supervision, apart from drones and for PIU sending pictures or videos from the site. You never know if it's truly accountable, all this information. So the idea was to organize a call with the PRU and consultants and supervision, and so the bank team could direct the call, connecting video and going with the call on the site. So technical engineers and other technical specialists like safeguards could see in real time the virtual, like reality, the physical, and direct the call on the site, on the infrastructure side. Yeah.
Very interesting. Before I go to the next topic, Mercedes, Jenny, did you want to add anything on this?
I didn't feel it was safe to have any consultant go to any community. At this, maybe as COVID evolves, it will be okay. So I did not feel comfortable exploring anything like that. But we did interview people in the community, and we did that by snowballing the interviews, and we sampled the communities even across the different regions where the projects had intervened using selective sampling.
Also, I understand that not every regular mission, sometimes they do sites visits. That is not always the case. So, I mean, compared to that cases, remote missions doesn't have any missing part. So, I mean, compare with the ideal mission in which you spend some days on the field, on project sites, then yes, there is some sort of gap.
In many ways, we were able to triangulate more interviews. The question was that all needed? But it gives you actually more information to compare, which is also a way to check the data.
Yeah. Perhaps one thing we can add to the series is a brainstorming session on how one tackles this problem at some point. I'm going to go on to the last topic and then open it up more broadly for comments. So our last comment is: do remote missions or remote provide opportunities that on the ground missions do not? I mean, is there an upside to any of this? So put your optimist hats on and let us know what you think. Felix, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much. There are upsides to this, and first of all, we go to collect evidence, and we understand that the evidence are in different pockets. So one is things that are already documented from other development partners, and sometimes even if you are not able to go to the field, but there is a DP who has done some work, you can use that evidence. So that's one. But the opportunity to record and able to listen to the interview again and again gives you some advantage that you wouldn't have if you just had an interview with the person said a number of things, you put your notes together, and then so that advantage is there. There is also an advantage of having more people to join these meetings. So in our case, for example, there were 2 people who are not going on mission, but because of this, we had an advantage to put everybody in the team to join almost every meeting if they want. So that is also a big opportunity there. One thing we've not explored is the geospatial data that I mentioned. I think that it's one area where we can improve the evidence of our work by exploring that. And so that is good. We could also easily organize, we could increase our reach with these meetings in a very cost-effective way. It is true that there are challenges, but the fact is that if we make a longer list and we do get the contact of those people, there is an advantage of reaching more people than just a few key people that will do. So that is an advantage. And of course, the last one is the issue about cost. We need to weigh as to whether the cost of traveling to the country, paying for hotels and everything, minus if we increase the number of days that a consultant will work on this, whether that will give us some cost effectiveness. But those are some of the things that one could think about as being the benefits of the virtual meeting.
Jenny?
I mean, I will say that I've discovered that missions are very cost effective and efficient. Yes, and I completely agree with Joseph's comment on the direct observation. I think that was really the huge loss. But there are benefits, and I think the benefit was really this time period where we could have been more strategic and thinking creatively about how we could collect the data over time. And more innovative in how we did that. And you have access to a screen also, because everybody has a computer where they could share documents so you in real time. So, we're talking about this report. They'd actually load the report up. So it's an opportunity that you could also use for reviewing content or collecting information. So there might be something there that could be leveraged, for example. And this triangulation of information, I think, also is an opportunity, because there is a lot of data that can be collected over time.
Mercedes?
Yeah, even I would add that we had cases in which the respondent wanted to share a data collection platform that they were using, and they just shared the screen and start like showing us how that worked and so forth. That in a face-to-face meeting, imagine that is organized in the World Bank offices. If that person doesn't have their personal computer, I mean, maybe you cannot have that opportunity.
Okay. As our chat is multiplying, so let me see. Actually, why don't I take myself? Jos, did you want to elaborate on your question directly? Since you wrote the longest text.
I wrote the longest text because everything is in the text itself. Okay. No, I have nothing to add. This is a very nice conversation. Thank you.
Jelko has asked a question about reaching CSOs and secondary stakeholders. Was this? I mean, is this just an issue of putting in a little bit more effort, or did you have the sense that important communities were not part of what they needed to be?
Jeff, reaching CSOs is possible. When for example, the bank office is open. In our case, Chad is a low capacity country. The internet connection is bad for many of them, and so in cases where the art team assistant or program assistant could send his modem to them, you could talk to them. Otherwise, it's difficult. But I can see that in other countries that have internet access, it will be easy to reach them, just like we reach the development partners. And so that shouldn't be a problem, whether they are in the private sector or CSO or even in development partner. It shouldn't make a difference. It's just whether the people have internet access, they do have a computer, they can be able to be able to communicate on.
Or even you can use a phone call. I mean, if
the telephone.
Yes.
Do people still
with
use
a cable?
That?
Yeah.
So let me open this up for any direct. Oh, sorry, Jenny, were you going to ask?
I believe in Niger that the telephone was used often for that particular case for similar challenges. But in all of the countries we did reach community actors. It just meant that cascade took a little more time.
And in terms of the kinds of consultants you get, are there skill sets that are sort of new that we need for this to operate this way, the is it really just the same consultants you would have gotten under normal circumstances?
I looked for consultants that had good analytical skills, but also not necessarily evaluation, but analytical skills, because we had our protocol, and we wanted some knowledge of how the bank operates, so that they knew sort of what an operation was, even, but not necessarily the specific sector, like in that sector, because we didn't want the bias, and some familiarity in terms of senior people in the country, not necessarily with the bank, so that they had comfort calling, because if they don't have the confidence to call up on Zoom a director or something, they can't conduct the interviews.
Also, I think we tend to hire a little bit more senior consultants compared to other experience when we can go on mission. Think about that we were dealing with 8 cases, so Jenny, me, and April could not handle those all by ourselves. So that's why we have put senior consultants in those countries that we cannot work directly. Otherwise, typically we hire local consultants with some, junior staff, because we are doing most of the interviews ourselves.
Rocio, oh, sorry, I was just coming back to you in a second, Felix. Rocio, you had an interesting question. Do you want to pose that directly?
Could you?
Are you there, Rocio? You've got, having the experience of working remotely, did your pre-COVID gold standard change to a new paradigm about how to perform evaluations?
Too soon to reflect upon it.
It's a fair answer. This is Felix, you were going to say.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to say that we shouldn't be shy to let a consultant go when we feel that the consultant is not giving us what we need. In our case, we hired an interpreter, and after the first 3 meetings, we realized that we were not getting what we need from the meeting. He was not interpreting well, and so we asked him to go, and then we hired somebody else. Now, we had 2 issues. One is budget. We had a consultant who was like, I think $380 an hour, or some $380 an hour. And we tried to negotiate that down. And then we had this other consultant who was like $80. And so we said, okay, this guy is $80 an hour, it's fine, let's pick him. But then we had issues along the line. And so we had to go back to the old consultant and renegotiate, to get a reasonable price. And he did a great job, and he's been with us since. And so we had to let that go. But because they knew it was COVID, they knew you were not coming there, they tried to, increase their prices and make it more expensive for you. So these things are there that the TTL needs to negotiate all of that to ensure that he keeps the cost within budget.
Soren has a question about access to the bank office. Were any of you able to use the bank office for interviews with non-bank people? Yeah. Okay.
No.
And that's probably not likely to change anytime soon, I don't believe. Okay. Any other questions from our now 50-something plus participants? And feel free to just type your name in.
But just to be clear, we couldn't use the bank office even for interviews with bank people.
Ah, okay.
With anybody, yes.
They're all at home. So.
I'm just reading a text from Gisela that she sees an advantage that we TTLs can actually participate in many interviews of other case study. Yes, that's true. It's an advantage, and we have done that across countries.
Jeff, just also mentioned that in terms of setting the number of meetings you can have in a day, it also depends on the time difference between US and the country. And so that could be a limitation. That could limit you a little bit. Sometimes you can only do just 2 hours. And for us, in our case, most of the meetings were 1.5 hours. And we pushed some of them to 1 hour, 45 minutes. But beyond 2 hours, nobody would like to meet you. So you want to keep the meetings and short, and you want to keep your questions more focused. And the advantage we had was that we really specified the questions that we're going to ask for each sector. So each person, we send the questions ahead of time, and so it makes them more comfortable to come for the meeting, knowing that there are no surprises. It increased trust also.
Translated into local language, I presume?
Translated into French, yes. We translated all the questions into French for them.
Okay. Were there any situations where you actually got written answers to questions that you'd submitted?
We did get written answers to some of the questions we sent, but we still had the interviews to clarify some of the issues that they had. For example, in the transport sector, when we sent them the questions, they sent, after 2 days, they met and then sent us responses to our questions, and then we met with them and then clarified some of the things that they had mentioned. Thanks to Johan for work that he did in that area.
So what are the overall budget implications of doing an evaluation in this kind of environment? I mean, clearly there are costs that you don't have to incur, costs you do have to incur. Is there a sense of what the net implications are this on the budgetary front?
Jeff, the data collection may take longer. And one of the things that we are learning is that could we shift the balance between collecting, having interviews, and using secondary data that has already been collected. And so, because if you have limited number of interviews in a day, it means that you're going to have more time. You need more time, and that has an implication in terms of the TTL and the teams, how much time they charge in the system. So maybe you put 8 weeks for it, but you might end up doing more than that. And so that has an implicit cost that we need to bear. But apart from that, in terms of balancing, and even the consultants, in my case, they are asking for more time. And they're saying we are spending more time, Felix, on this. And so you need to add more time to it. So it could be expensive if you can have many meetings within a certain specific time. And so you may need to rebalance and shift to using some more of already secondary data prepared by DPs or from credible sources.
Although I suppose with the Bangladesh CP, it's less time in traffic, so it probably works out to be on balance the same. Sorry, Mercedes, Jenny, do you want to add anything onto the budget question?
Yeah, I would say that it really depends on how complex is your case study. So if you're going to rely just on interviews, you just need to budget that. But if you're also incorporated evidence from desk work, project documents, impact evaluations, evidence from other donors that are related to the World Bank, etc. There is a lot of desk work that you have to do as well, and this has to be taken into account. So, of course, you save in hotel and traveling, but you maybe need more people on the ground, and it takes a little longer. So I think the challenge is to take advantage of the flexibility of remote missions. That means that you're not constrained to do your interviews in 2 weeks, but still be careful and time your output, because otherwise it can get very long. So yes, that's for me the trick and a lesson for the future.
Something Mercedes says I think is very important is the more you put on some of the analytical work on the consultants, the longer it's going to take, because usually in a mission you have that interaction more so where you're actually, it's sort of like a team mentorship where you're analyzing things together, but they're now more on their own and interpreting things. So there's a lot of need for exchange across and virtually. It just takes more time, and to get an answer to a question, it can take 2 days if you're on the other side of the world. So if you're just doing interviews, it's going to be cost effective. But then if they need to be involved in the interpretation, which we felt was critical, because in order to get the lack of that observation and context, right? I think also this triangulation of multiple interviews was really important to us to have more confidence in the sort of findings. So it's not our experience was definitely not cheaper than a mission.
Elena, would you like to ask your question? I think that there's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, because for the gender in FCV evaluation and consider, well, I have several difficulties, finding the right consultant, etc. But also I was thinking about, several missions going side by side, which could be an advantage or a disadvantage. I would see also the advantages, but then I'm concerned about how much time the TTL has to spend for really training, brainstorming, debriefing, having the consultants fully appreciate what's the goal of the evaluation. I mean, we are going to miss all these opportunities like lunches and dinners and informal conversations we have all the time we are on mission. And so I was just wondering how absorbing this was in terms of time.
Alina, I can tell you that it's very absorbing, and it can sap a lot of your energy. Look, I had to review all the questions that went to the government, and that meant additional time. I had to review the interview notes that some of the colleagues had produced. Means that because I sat in all the meetings, I spent more time there. And when I review the interview notes, it means adding and saying that, well, you missed this, and adding to it. Then when they've done the write-ups, I've reviewed some of the write-ups 2 or 3 times. And in some cases, I've even involved other colleagues to join to review some of the write-ups. I called peer reviewers, and so it's involving, and it takes a lot of your time as a TTL. And so it's not easier, but it's the new way of doing things. So we're doing it.
It was extremely time consuming. We worked from early in the morning to very late at night, and we worked at the other countries' hours.
Yes. So imagine, as Elena was saying, in a regular mission, you end up an interview, and while you are going to another one, you can chat around the conversation you just had, what you have learned, and so forth. If you're having an online meeting at 11 at night, after it ends, you don't want to talk about it. You just want to hang up and finish your day. So, but also we did have regular meetings with each of the teams, like twice, sometimes a week, guiding, providing feedback, revisions of revisions of revisions. I mean, not revisions of the minutes, revisions of the outputs that they would have to submit with the right content. And even we did some sort of online workshop at the beginning with all the teams, in which we walk through them the protocol that we developed to collect all the information. And we had several calls, WhatsApp, either way to communicate at any time to guide them. So yes, it was very, very, very time consuming, times 8.
So April, I think you've got some, I'm looking at some of your comments, you've got some experience to share here. Do you want to?
April is part of the team.
Ah, she's part of your team. Well, that.
Yes.
So you're hogging all the expertise, I see. Yeah. But I mean, does anyone else have some experience they'd like to share on what's worked, particularly what's worked, and what's worked better than other things they may have tried? How do you reduce WebEx Zoom fatigue? That is the $100,000 question these days.
I'm actually going to rephrase the question. How do you encourage your consultants to spend more time on the sort of interpretation or the sort of the desk work when they are struggling with the balancing of all these Zoom calls, etc.? Because it actually became a challenge that most of the teams became sort of overwhelmed by managing the Zoom, and as a result, the desk work was sort of suffering. So one of the things I would adjust in the future is having sort of a more detailed timeline, which details when they should do the desk work, when they should do the Zoom work, etc.
And as we have some questions about other approaches for diversifying data sources, which is a little bit out of the scope of today's discussion, but it may warrant maybe another session at a different time. There's a question about how does one interpret nonverbal communication online?
Jeff, that is difficult. You know, it's difficult. That is where you need the local insight, because sometimes if your local consultant is in the meeting and we try to put him in all the meetings, after the meeting he can tell you that, well, this person said this, but really this is what I think they meant, and so that you can get after the meeting, not during the meeting. If you have review meetings, and when we started with everybody in all the meetings, and so we got some feedback even from the country office, the program assistant. You know, he sent me emails, and we had meetings, and then he explained to me that this person, this is how you deal with it, deal with him or her. That person, that's how you. So I had some insights, and so those non-verbal things you can know, but in some cases, really, it's difficult. You can't. There's nothing you can do.
Let me ask a variation of Stephen's question. Do you have examples of either interlocutors or sources of data that you went to that you otherwise would not have because of constraints?
Yeah, for example, in our case, I started looking at the EITI website to see what do they have, what are the reports that they have there. And so in a normal case, we just do have one resource indicator there, and so you probably will just go speak to the coordinator. But before the meeting, it required some more rigorous preparation, because we are doing it virtually, and so you want to ask the most focused and most intelligent questions. And so we looked at the websites for each of the government agencies that we're going to talk to. And so that way we got some additional information that helped us to craft our questions that we sent to them. But my team members are also they are also connected, so they could speak to some of the work that they did. Well, Chris is there.
Just on your last point, Felix, I imagine that if you wanted to speak to EITI or the author of that report, we now have no geographic constraints, and then previously we might not have thought of doing that.
Yeah, but Jeff, let me, apart from EITI, for example, the IMF, when you want to speak to them, they want to be sure that you have read all their reports. And so if you can't go speak to the IMF without reading their report, and they will ask you even questions about the content. Have you seen this in this report? Have you seen that? And so I'm saying that you require some more rigorous preparation before some of those meetings.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Nelson, are you out there? Would you like to add something on the chat experience? Chris? Okay. Anyone else on your team, Felix, you wanted to call on?
If Erica or Anna, any of the team members, they should feel free to speak up.
Hi, it's Erica. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Erica.
Hi, everybody. Just briefly, I actually connected a little bit late, so Felix may have already shared probably all the important insights. But I wanted to, I guess, give my perspective. I think I might have been the only person on the team who wasn't an excellent French speaker, so that put me at even more of a disadvantage in trying to have these remote, let's say a remote virtual mission with the government. And these missions, of course, are always difficult. We come in as IEG, as relative outsiders. We haven't met the government before. We're trying to be objective, but we're also trying to read subtleties in their responses and kind of, let's say, read between the lines from what they say, because most government officials will be formal, as they should be, with outsiders. So it laid another 7 or 8 layers of difficulty, I would say, in trying to get any new or genuine insights on the meetings. And I think, I won't say I'll say Felix led an absolutely heroic effort to absolutely do the best we could. But it was tough. It was definitely tough. And I think hard to pin down, let's say, exactly how many new insights we actually got from it. I think it's very important that we did it. And and perhaps I don't know if we've learned some lessons about how to do it better in the future. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And by the way, if Oscar's out there, I'm gonna put him on notice that I might ask him to give us some of his thoughts on this. I have not yet fully figured out how to navigate the list of participants.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, good. You're there.
Jeff, but before Oscar comes, can I also thank the Methods team? They've given us in vivo 12, and we are trying all the options to be able to use it for these new virtual meetings, to be able to use it to also transcribe the audio that we have. And so we are trying all of these. And so just to thank the Methods team for supporting us.
Okay. I'd like to thank April also, because she's really done a lot of work in Niger, and I think it was the most challenging country for the nutrition cases.
Mercedes, did you want to thank the Academy or anyone?
No, yes, no, actually, I would like to thank Jean-Jacques, who really provide a lot of support with French translation with April. He has done a great job, much more of outside his normal duties. So thank you.
So one of the lessons is get a lot of native speakers on your team.
Yes, as much as you can.
So, Oscar, we're in the last 10 minutes. Can we call on you? Although you may need to unmute. Just saying, I'm not trying to be critical.
There it is. Thank you. Just a couple of minutes. I really wanted to thank everybody for the super insightful conversation. Of course, as expected, but it's still really useful to all of us. I was actually struck a little bit by the conversation, because there were almost more positives that I had expected to hear. So there were some unexpected positives. So I think I took note at least 7, without counting the less time in traffic in Bangladesh. So the first one is that actually this changes the window of conducting a sort of interviewing, and that can actually have upside. So you can get to more of the right people, as Jenny and Mercedes said. There was also an unexpected point that Mercedes made, that some people were more candid in interviews. This is surprising. Of course, it's case by case, but it's worth noting. And also that we do have something that we share on the COVID situation that can create an immediate sort of like a point of contact. Felix mentioned that actually you're creating historical byproducts as you record these documents, and some people really felt so proud of their description of their programs that they wanted to pass it along to so that actually is value. And also it's a little bit unexpected, because I, like others, had more the prior of like, nobody's wanting to be recorded, and it may be the case that in some countries that's going to be, but it was also worth hearing. The point about we now have more conversations on the basis of documents and data on the spot. That sometimes we may have a very nice conversation, but then soon after we finish the conversation, we look at the data and say, like, what were they saying? The data doesn't match what they were telling us. And so that's also like a positive. And this point that the TTL can be in a sense all relevant meetings and maybe ensure more consistency. Now, none of this comes either free or cheap. And it's very clear that this slows us down. This is slowing us down, and so I think that we need to, and of course we miss out on all that richness of the impromptu exchanges, the sort of like a serendipity that happens when you bump into the minister in the same restaurant that you're having dinner, all those things that make missions fascinating. So we're missing all of that. And so the question there is like, is there any way to not substitute, but do something that may actually give you some flavor of the country? Should you also be scheduling conversations with people that in a way have not much to do with your evaluation, but can give you some sort of like or put you in the frame of mind? Maybe actually among us. When I looked at the number of countries that IAG has visited in the last 10 years, almost every country in the world has been visited by IAG staff. So we do have in-house a lot of experience with conducting missions in those countries. Of course, counterparts change, countries change, but I think that almost like our first point of contact should be reaching out to others within IAG that have done missions, maybe even recently in those countries. But still, time is money, and if this is slowing us down, this is sort of like a significant. I don't think that we're going to be increasing budgets. So this basically means only two things: we either reduce the scope of what we're trying to do, or we actually change the production function, or maybe both, because in a way, I think some of you mentioned it, that interviews become less cost effective. So we, in a sense, if you're thinking of your, if you have a fixed budget constraint, as we all have, we need to change a little bit the technology. And maybe the downside of you can reach more of the right people, I think Jenny mentioned it as well, was like maybe we are reaching too many, because in a way we end up erring on the side of like, let's make absolutely sure. Can we actually reduce the scope so that we can keep that manageable? And there is no easy answer, and it's going to be all on a case-by-case basis. But my feeling from this conversation is that we are actually, Jeff started by saying that we are not at the point of writing a good practice note. But I got the sense that we are actually farther along than maybe I had feared, that we actually did learn quite a bit over the last few months, and that we are actually not getting into the next round of evaluations completely blindsided. So some points for the teams that are starting is really to not think of the replacing all the meetings that we would have had in a mission, all the issues that would have been covered in a mission, but really asking much more hard-nosed question of like, is there any other way in which I could get an answer to this question? Because I think I heard very loud from all of you, Felix, Jenny, and Mercedes, that it takes more time to prepare for these interviews than it was before. So we are going to have to replace some of those, and I think that some of the examples were mentioned on maybe look at other organizations, talk more with other people that may be closer to our starting point. But others, I invite everybody to really think creatively. More use of local coverage of the in the press, finding ways of bringing in people that normally we wouldn't have brought in, because who's going to come to IAG to give a seminar, having to travel across countries. But now the invitation is just an hour of your time. So I'm thinking, who's the relevant journalist that we want to be speaking to, and we could just or who's the historian that you would really, or the psychologist from the country that you think it may be relevant to speak to. Normally we wouldn't have actually taken that meeting, because the opportunity cost of within the 1 week mission is very high, and you want to meet all the government officials. But this is the type of thing that now it may be easier to get some of these unexpected sources of information and of flavor, as I said earlier. Anyway, I just really wanted to thank everybody for taking the time, and above all, for putting all this effort over the last few months. I know it's been super hard on so many of you, on all of you. So big thanks to all. And as Jeff said, this is a series, so I think that we are the bar is now very high for the next participants.
Oh, there's
Thank
a bar.
You.
Okay, so there will be bar service later. Now, just thank you very much, Oscar. In fact, just to close, first of all, the organization for all of this, I want to thank Hema for doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And let me pass it then to Peter and Bahar, maybe to talk about next steps, what the next seminar in the series is, and also to put out there, if anyone's got suggestions for topics that they'd like us to pursue, please pass those on to any of us at any point in time. Over to you, Peter and Bahar.
Peter, should I speak first, or would you like to go first?
No, yes, please, Bahar, please go first.
So I'll just stay brief because I know we're about a minute away, and it was a very engaging conversation. I see that people are asking for examples and protocols. I mean, this was exactly how it is intended, so we can learn a little bit from each other, replicate as much as we can. And I think Jenny mentioned that not to reinvent the wheel if we can. So the plan is that we'll have the recording of the session along with some general notes on our IG's internal website, like perhaps Insider or IG's COVID page. Everybody will have access, and we'll create a space for anyone to add any other thoughts, suggestions, requests for topics. So we'll keep a tally of what our other suggestions and requests for topics are coming. Hopefully the next session will be at the end of September. Tentatively, we're planning for September 29th with some MDBs and their experiences of what they're doing to conduct their evaluation and evaluative work in this environment, because most of them are just like in the same boat like us. We had one discussion with ADB, Asian Development Bank, which was quite similar to what we sort of discussed right now. But again, the idea is that everybody would like to learn from each other and to sort of raise more questions about what else can we do, where else can we tap, what are other technologies that we can bring. And our job with Peter and the Learning Academy and Hema in KC with Alejandro is to make sure that you as IG evaluators have access to some of the knowledge that everybody is accruing, both within IG but also globally. So we'll try our best to bring it to you. Thank you.
Peter, over to you. But you will have to unmute or speak really loudly.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Bahar. And yeah, thanks, nothing to add from my side, and thanks for the great session. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and I'll just thank our panelists, Mercedes and Jenny and Felix, for sharing their experience and wisdom. And with that, everyone have a safe, happy, sane, healthy day, afternoon, week, everything. Talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.